Saturday night, in between episodes of Sex Education on Netflix, I went over to C-SPAN and I watched former President Donald Trump speaking at the state fairgrounds in Des Moines. And I must say, I got sucked into it. Once I started watching, I couldn't turn it off. I was so interested to see, well, what's the pitch? What, if anything, has changed since we last saw him in that kind of a forum? Meridith McGraw watched because she was there. She was actually boots on the ground and wrote about it for Politico. In all of my social media right now, you can find the piece that she authored under the headline, "Trump Holds Fast to His Election Lies as the GOP Establishment Hugs Him Tighter." And that really seemed to be the biggest takeaway, not only what Trump had to say, but who was there to hear his words. Meridith, thank you so much. I really appreciate your being here.
Thanks for having me.
So he had the state leadership, right? Do describe.
Yeah, so that's one of the things I talked about in my piece. I've been covering Trump rallies for a long time. I had been to, the last one I went to was one in Ohio, but what was so different about this one was that you really had a who's who of powerful people in Iowa come there to support the president or the former president, to accept his endorsement in the case of Senator Grassley and to sing his praises. Obviously, this was a rally to try to give people a boost ahead of the 2022 midterm elections. That's obviously a priority for Trump and the GOP. But what was significant was that you had these heavy hitters that were standing alongside of him. And it really spoke to the idea that Trump really is the de facto leader of the party, despite what some people would like to say. He's really somebody that is being embraced by some of the biggest establishment figures, people like Grassley.
As you pointed out in Politico, this is quite a change of heart from where Grassley was not that long ago relative to Trump, and in particular, the events of January 6th.
Yeah, he had some really hard, tough words for the former president after January 6th. He had talked about how he had belittled election officials, that Biden clearly won, Trump lost, and that he should move on, but Trump didn't. It was some pretty tough words. He obviously didn't vote for Trump's impeachment, but he still came out basically saying, without saying it, we should probably distance ourselves from this guy. But that was, 10 months ago. And now it's October. Grassley's trying to run again for an 8th term. And as he noted there, when he accepted his endorsement from Trump, 91% of Republicans in Iowa support Trump. So he said he'd be foolish if he didn't accept that endorsement, and went along and stood by Trump's side as he held this rally.
Meridith, when I tuned in naively, I wondered whether Trump would spend much, if any, time on the 2020 election and his charges that it was stolen. And yet that was the mainstay of what I heard him say. I mean, most of his focus, of course, he talked about his perception of President Biden's record, but most of his focus still seemed to be on the 2020 election outcome. And I wondered, how was that playing on the ground in Des Moines?
That's a really good question. I mean, you watch the speech. The first chunk of it is really what the GOP probably would like Trump to be talking about, right? He was going hard after President Biden on immigration, the border, talking about the economy, inflation, things that, like I said, the Republican Party would probably much rather Trump be talking about. But the bulk of it was about his lie that he won the 2020 election. And he had this one line that I thought was so telling. Trump said that people in Congress have gone to him and they've said, you need to focus more on the future. You shouldn't be focusing on the past. And he said, oh, but what I tell them is the biggest cheers, the biggest pull, the biggest respect from people, I'm assuming his rally audiences or people that he talks to, is talking about election fraud. And What was interesting, he did get cheers, but when I talked to supporters out there in the crowd, I went and talked to over a dozen people and asked them if they think Trump should run again. You can guess what the answer was to that, but also sort of what issues do they really care about? What do they want to hear from Trump? What's really motivating them right now? And the issues that I predominantly heard were things like immigration, what they were seeing on TV at the border, was things like inflation and concerns about jobs in their community and how their community is recovering from COVID. And then, of course, they would bring up, because they're talking to a reporter, they would bring up some of their complaints about the media and media coverage. And a few did talk about election integrity and how they think the election was rigged and things like that. But that wasn't the overwhelming response. What were some of the more traditional issues that Republicans talked about. So I thought that was interesting, that they would only dive into some of the conspiracy theories or things that the former president talks about once I prompted them with a question asking them if they think Biden legitimately won the election.
Well, if you're right, he's misreading that room. In this case, it was outdoors at the Iowa State Fairgrounds. It will be interesting to see how many Chuck Grassleys, as he continues to do these rallies around the country, meaning Republicans of stature who are incumbents, are willing to stand at his side while he drones on about the 2020 election. For me, watching at home, it looked like Festivus for we Seinfeld fans. I mean, this was a total airing of grievances without much new being discussed. And I just wonder if that'll get tiresome, given how much time is still left on the clock and assuming he does go. One soundbite, if I may, because I found this to be illustrative of what the Trump pitch was Saturday night in Iowa, and it was pertaining to my home state of Pennsylvania.
In Pennsylvania, there were reportedly hundreds of thousands of more votes than there were voters. Oh, I see. Philadelphia, more votes than voters. That's a tough one to explain.
Aaron Blake, by the way, writing in the Washington Post, says this was pretty easily explained and was just as quickly debunked. He was debunking a number of the things that Trump said. While there were nearly 7 million votes cast, a system used by Pennsylvania's Secretary of State called the Statewide Uniform Registered Electors, or SURE, recorded only 6.8 million voters at the time. The reason? The data lagged, because it involved manually entering records about people's voter histories. What else did you find significant, Meridith, about your time on the ground in Des Moines watching former President Trump last Saturday night?
I mean, when you're there, it is a crowd of diehard supporters. I mean, these folks are, they really love him. They really respond to him. You can see it just in what they're wearing. Their T-shirts are all pro-Trump or making fun of Biden, or say Trump 2024 or Trump DeSantis, or media is the enemy. There's sort of, as there always has been, this sort of, I don't know, rock concert tailgate feel to it all. And people are still really hanging on every word that he has to say. But, you know, at the same time, it really does feel like it transcends just Trump, the person. This really is a movement of people, and it's sort of a community. I would be interviewing people, and strangers would want to pop in and give their 2 cents on how they feel about something. And you know, I think beyond some of the things we talked about, vaccines were obviously a thing that came up quite frequently in conversations I had with people. Vaccine mandates, or people who just don't believe in the science behind it. I spoke with 2 nurses, in fact, who were saying that they told me that they didn't take the vaccine and refused to. So I think it's important for me as a reporter to have these conversations with folks and to see where they're coming from. But I think as we talk about 2024 and whether or not Trump is going to get into the race, from what I've been told, you know, there are only green lights for him to run at this point. It's something he's talked about with advisors and friends as well. although he hasn't officially announced, he's going to have this entire movement ready to go. And in Iowa too, he already has boots on the ground. He has two longtime political advisors who are already there in the state. So
he's doing all of the things one needs to do if they intend to run. I think you put your finger on something a moment ago when you said that it transcends Trump in many respects. I don't know that there's anyone else on the horizon who could marshal this level of enthusiasm from these folks. But, you know, there's a belief system out there that is bigger than Donald Trump, right? I mean, he was able to draw on sentiments that others weren't able to tap into. And I think that's important for people to realize who are opponents of Donald Trump, don't like Donald Trump. If Donald Trump doesn't run in 2024, it doesn't mean that all of the sentiment that's out there to be drawn on by Trump goes away. Those folks are still there. They're just going to be looking for somebody else. That's one observation that I would make. I'll give you the final word.
Yeah, I mean, again, on 2024, it was, interesting to hear some of his supporters there say that he's number one on his list. The other person they talked about a lot, of course, was Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida. But already, just by Trump holding this rally in Iowa, we've seen people like Vice President Mike Pence, Senator Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, Ted Cruz go to Iowa to try to get a feel for potentially running in 2024. But with Trump going there, holding this rally, getting thousands of people to come out and listen to him, that's just the kind of power that some of these other folks just don't have. And in a lot of ways, he's already frozen the field before it really even gets started here.
Meridith, I think the reason that your piece was a bit of a wake-up call for me is that I tend to get consumed in the news of the day. I pay attention to things like the John Eastman legal memoranda and the influence that it had on the Trump White House and the way in which they were trying to cajole Mike Pence to go to Capitol Hill and do more than be a bean counter. I read Stephanie Grisham's book cover to cover. I read Peril cover to cover. And therefore, I'm influenced by all of this information, which bodes really poorly for Trump. Mm-hmm. And then you're in the thick of a rally in Des Moines where nobody cares about any of that stuff. They want more Trump.
They just want more Trump.
They want more Trump. They want more Trump.